everybody. My name is Ashley, and I am the social media manager for Extensis, and I am here with Tara.
Hi, I'm Tara Starzinski. I'm a content producer at Extensis.
And today we're going to have a chat with Donald Tarallo. He's an amazing guy. He's an entrepreneur. He's a graphic designer. He's a typeface designer, a professor, a father, and we can't wait to ask you some of these questions. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Before we dive in too much about projects and other stuff, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started and what drew you to typography initially?
How I got started, I think we can go back to my childhood. I grew up in the ceramic studio of my grandmother, and it was there that I learned form giving and developed a strong love for the art of and craft of giving form. Then later on in undergraduate school, I went to Clark University where I studied art and design, which led me to Basel, Switzerland to attend classes at the Basel School of Design, which was a school with a heavy emphasis on typography. Several years later, I attended graduate school at the Rhode Island School of Design, again, another school with a heavy influence or heavy emphasis on typography. And those experiences really led me down this pathway that I'm following today as a type designer and graphic designer.
Very cool. Very cool. I would love to know more about your creative process. I know you have some things to show us. So would you mind just kind of taking us through that journey?
Yeah, my creative process, it always begins on paper. I like to draw. I like to write. Sometimes I paint, trace. Then I go to the computer. Sometimes I go back and forth between the computer and printing and drawing over prints and back and forth. Most recently, one of my typefaces was made into a letterpress type by Type High in Wales in the UK. My typeface form pattern. And that's a very interesting dimension to see my work being brought into and seeing what people do with it. And it definitely informs me back in my own creative process. I made a little video to show you around my desk and some of the different parts of my process, and as well as some of the outcomes, which I can show you in a minute here. Here are some sketches. Here's a letter form painted. Some finished typefaces. Some sketches for my typeface form pattern. The tote bag, also in form pattern. Form pattern made here in wood type for letterpress.
You actually teach type design, which is so cool. That sounds like a really fun job. I'm sure that you have to tell your students all the time what they need to do to ensure that a typeface is successful. Do you have any advice for professional designers when they're working in agencies or as freelancers for clients on different campaigns? What should they be looking for in a typeface to make sure it's successful in their project?
Well, there are a lot of things. Probably the most important, in my opinion, would be that the style of the type should fit the mood of the content. Other than that, I think, knowing what your design needs are very important. For example, if you're designing a book and you have lots of different kinds of content, different kinds of text, you want to choose a typeface that has lots of different weights so that you have opportunities to create different kinds of hierarchies or emphasis on different levels of content. So on one hand, I'd say mood, finding the right mood. On the other hand, function, how does it serve the design need?
And so we know that type design is your thing, but your work, we know you do so much more, Donald. So we saw that you've done a graphic design and book design as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those projects?
I think everything I do, I approach from the point of view of typography. I think it's a big part of my background in education. So it's hard for me to not look at any design problem from the point of view of how can I approach this and solve this problem using text. For me, designing with text using type is probably the closest to like the essence of the content in many cases, especially if it's text-based content.
That's so cool. I love that it just informs everything you do. That's why it all looks so good because it has good typography sense. Um, One thing that I noticed when I was looking at your site is so I've interviewed a lot of type designers. I've looked at a lot of different fonts because we work in font management, and I know that fonts get expensive for people collecting fonts. But your all of the designs that you offer are extremely affordable compared to some of the other stuff in the marketplace. How is it that you're able to offer them at a price like that? Is design accessibility something that drives your work? Is it a big value for you when you're creating typefaces?
Well, certainly I want my work to be affordable and accessible to as many people as possible. Um, I think starting out back in 2014, when I really began venturing into type design, I just followed the guidelines that the vendors suggested for a type designer of my level and what I was offering. So they had, fixed or very clear type design, type price guidelines that I followed, and I have stuck to that so far. In terms of whenever I come up with something, I definitely want to make sure that I'm not making it overpriced, that nobody's going to want to try my work out. Maybe in the future, if I become a very famous, well-known type designer, that will change. But I would still consider myself the type designer in evolution, finding my way in this field. So I'm comfortable with the price structure that I offer.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. You said finding your way. I think sometimes as creatives, we're like, how can we find our way regarding something that we're passionate about and generate an income? And so we looked at those tote bags, and I thought that was just such a cool idea for you to incorporate your typeface designs into. What kind of led to you adding those to your tote bags?
I guess in graduate school, we had a studio down the hall from fashion textile design, and I would walk by after my classes or working in the studio at night, and I would always look in and watch the textile designers making patterns, and it was such an inspiring thing for me. I think I just loved watching them make patterns. And growing up, my father and my stepmother had a clothing store, so I always was around clothing and fashion and fabrics and whatnot. And later on, and when I started designing type, and I designed form pattern, which is a typeface intentionally made to create patterns, it just led quite naturally into my thinking about, well, what could this be beyond something that would be printed material on paper? And I said, well, here's my chance to finally explore pattern making and textile design. So I thought immediately that, well, I don't know how to sew very well. So probably one of the easiest things to do would be to make something square, and a pillowcase or a tote bag. And I liked the idea of making tote bags because, number one, it has an environmental purpose that, people buying these would less likely be using plastic bags, and it's reusable and strong material that would last a long time. And then on the other hand, I just really wanted to see what I could do with this to make it something beyond just type design.
And sometimes I feel like we search to kind of figure out those paths, and it's amazing how our childhood and our background experiences can really lead us in the right direction if we tap into them. And I think that's just so cool that you tapped into that.
I love that pattern. It's beautiful. Another thing that we saw on your site is the binario.
Binario.
Binario. I don't know if I'm saying this right. All I can pronounce in Italian are gelato flavors, but the
Those are the
binario.
most important things to know anyway.
Binario. Okay, so that typeface, it's beautiful. It's so modern. But you were telling us a little bit about how it is inspired by your travels in Italy, and I completely see that when I see that typeface. I'm just like, it is a whole culture. It's a mood. It's like very like 1960s, 1970s, just like moped. It is such a fun and beautiful font. And I think it's really interesting to me because I think that in the creative field, we think a lot about different things being inspired by a place, right? Like we think like, oh, this novel is inspired by Paris, or oh, of course that fashion is so inspired by this location, but we don't really think about that for typefaces generally. Um, can you speak a little bit to how your travel there has inspired you, and where else do you draw your inspiration from?
Um, I think that began by accident. I was teaching a workshop there at the Siena Art Institute, and I had a very small number of students. I think I had 3 students that year. And I gave the students the assignment to go out into the city and create a typeface inspired by something you see in the city of Siena. And the school was very happy to host my workshop given that theme. But at a certain point, I realized like I was maybe too annoying to my students because there was only 3. I could only give them so much time, and then I needed to let them work. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do the assignment myself and show them as my students how I would do it. I did the whole uppercase during that summer course. And this was all done not in a computer lab with a brush on paper. So I worked on the project with my students, and it was fun because they could develop what they were doing, I could develop what I was doing, and we could discuss it. I think for me, it was inspired by, I think first and foremost, the sense of place. Like, what is the sense of Siena for me? How does Siena give me, what kind of emotions does it give me? How do I feel in the city when I'm walking through it? And how could a typeface encapsulate that kind of feeling? I think everybody, when they're creating something, in the back of their mind, they want to have it embody some emotional tone or mood, like a musician does when they create a song. So for me, I would walk around Siena thinking, wow, this is a very compact, tightly packed city with heavy brick buildings, many Roman arches, which I inspired the curves and the letter forms. Going down outside the city to the train station in Florence, I saw some architecture from the Art Deco period, and some of the lettering, the modular lettering in the train station in Florence inspired me. Back in Siena, lots of urban signage inspired me again, lots of modular urban signage. And even the feeling of walking down the street, like stopping and drinking an espresso in one of the cafes that had a logo from the Art Deco period. So looking at the espresso cup while I'm drinking it, all of these experiences, I just was drinking it in. I love the country, I love the culture, and I wanted to connect with it. So the uppercase began there, and then it evolved into the lowercase at home during a sabbatical. And now it's a quite successful typeface that has 3 weights, and I'm very happy with it. But that's like for Binario, that was my main inspiration. But what inspires me beyond, like as a designer, beyond that experience, just as a creative person, nature is probably the most inspiring thing for me. Just watching how nature changes, the seasons. Living in New England, there are plenty of seasons to experience different things. Writers, the creative process of a writer. I recently read how Stephen King writes and his disciplined process, and how other people write. And I think it's very interesting as a creative person to think about how other creatives in different disciplines shape a practice. Chefs and cooking, musicians, the career paths of musicians, poets, and probably most of all my students. I think that's one of the reasons I teach, is that I can definitely every day when I'm in the classroom with my students, sometimes it can be more rewarding for me to just be in that experience with them and watch them making and growing and maturing than any other part of my practice. And I bring that back to my studio, and that energy fuels me to explore and experiment. And I think the nature of my practice is definitely experimental, which is very much connected to my teaching. I like to push the boundaries of what design is and question norms.
I completely understand what you mean with that. I feel like with students and people in the beginning of their careers, sometimes they don't have all those rules in place. Like they don't know all of the things of like, oh, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. So they just have a lot more abstract ways of going about getting things done. And I think we can all learn from that.
Right. Yeah. A naive, or not, maybe naive, not the right word, but an innocent sense of play. I think it's important to maintain that in our practice, and teaching gives me that.
And, I always say I can't create if I don't have balance. So it kind of leads me into my next question. With all of the things that you're doing, you're a father, you're an entrepreneur, you're a professor. How are you maintaining balance so that you can create your best work?
Oh, quiet time. It's hard in our time to find quiet time to just reflect, but I make time for it. Unplug, try to keep a balanced life, work slow. And I think that's one reason why I really like designing type. It's not possible to design a typeface quickly, at least for me. It takes time, sometimes years to create something. So I like that I can make something and then get tired of it, put it aside, let it sit there for a while, come back to it later. Listening to my instinct, prioritizing, giving time to contemplate. I think those are all like really important parts of my own balance and growth. And I think instinct, when I listen to it, tells me, all right, now it's time to stop and go outside or spend time with people.
It's so important to actually listen when you have that instinct too, and not just make yourself keep working. One thing that I found with creatives is I don't know if I've ever met a creative where they just wanted to do one creative thing and that was it. I feel like most creatives that I know are happiest when they're finding new ways to express themselves and new ways to apply the skills they already have. Is there another creative pursuit that you want to explore or that you're already exploring?
I guess in context of type design, I'm very excited about variable font technology and the web, and what type can be beyond what type design can be beyond static type design. Very interested also in fashion, interior design. I can see those someday becoming avenues that I explore more. If I can find the right opportunities, I would love to be able to do something, particularly with interior design.
Very cool. I like that you mentioned fashion too, because when I saw the pattern that you have for the tote bags, I was like, oh, it'd be so cool as like a silk scarf or something too.
I did. I actually bought a sewing machine, and I have been playing around, but I'm just not skilled enough. I probably need to apprentice under a tailor or something to really know what I'm doing. But it's fun to make pillowcases and things like that.
And do you have any upcoming interior design projects? Tell us what's next. What should we be looking out for?
Let's see. No, nothing in interior design. I did submit a proposal for an environmental graphic design in my city here, but the project was put on hold at the onset of COVID, and it hasn't really been revived yet. So I'm hoping if it does, then I can continue to pursue that project, which would include using one of my typefaces as an environmental art piece. Other than that, I'm slowing down now to just remaster some of my past typefaces. I've learned a lot since I began designing type, and I want to go back and make the existing ones that I've made better. I always do that with my work, and I think that's one of the nice things about type design is you can just keep evolving the typefaces that you make in different ways. So I'm going to remaster a few of those, and I do have a new one in the works, which I anticipate 1 or 2 more years before I can finish that.
Nice. And so we want to find out more about you. Where can we go? What are your websites and your social handles?
My social handle, Instagram, is tarallo.design. You can look on my website at tarallodesign.com. That's TARALLO. And you can always email me. My email's on my website if you want to talk more, or on my website I also have a newsletter tab, or subscription tab, if somebody would like to subscribe to my newsletter, which I release 1 or 2 a year.
Well, we appreciate your time. We know you're busy. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to just having a chat with more creatives from all over the world. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.